Son of Man came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." He replied, "What do you wish me to do for you?" They answered him, "Grant that in your glory we may sit one at your right and the other at your left." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" They said to him, "We can." "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right or at my left is not mine to give, but is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they became indignant at James and John. Jesus summoned them and said to them, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones make their authority over them felt. But it shall not be so among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to offer his life as ransom for many." The Gospel of the Lord. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to offer his life as a ransom for many. This one line from today's gospel reading captures the essential message of Mark's entire gospel. It's the shortest gospel, a very fast-paced drama that focuses our attention upon the promises of God regarding the suffering servant that Isaiah prophesied. Jesus is always going immediately from one amazing event to another as the servant who demonstrates God's love through actions. Chapter by chapter, the gospel unfolds the dual focus of Jesus' life: service and sacrifice. And the ultimate service, to ransom all people from the debt of sin, requires the ultimate sacrifice. In fact, the lines immediately preceding the bold request that James and John make are, "The Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death, hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him, spit upon him, scourge him, and put him to death." Perhaps the sons of Zebedee did not want to dwell on all that suffering. They'd rather change the subject altogether, put that suffering stuff aside, and let's ponder the glory. Grant that in your glory we may be on either side of you. In a sense, Jesus says, be careful what you ask for, because eventually they will drink the cup that he will drink, and they will suffer like he suffered. But it seems obvious to me that James and John didn't fully understand Since Jesus himself, using the intimate word Abba, begged his Father to take his cup of suffering away from him as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Similarly, in the letter to the Hebrews, we are told, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. He tearfully prayed, "Save me from death," and he was heard. His prayer was heard, yet he still suffered and died. We have all prayed as the fully human Jesus did, from the instinct and fear that desires to avoid suffering. And we often ask, why does an all-loving, merciful Father allow suffering and catastrophe, even when he has understood in great detail the prayers of those who are about to be afflicted? We know in the case of Jesus, the suffering was necessary to bring about the salvation of the world. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to offer his life as a ransom for many. Perhaps there's a greater good in our suffering, one that does not represent abandonment or the absence of God's love. Many parents, especially parents of older children, know that sometimes, after all the avenues of intervention have been tried, suffering is the only thing left that can teach. So even though they see the train wreck ahead, they do not rush in to stop the tragedies that will befall their children. But they are always there, always accompanying, and in their compassion, suffering with them. This being with is another unique kind of love, a love rooted in God's promise to be with us always. Consider that suffering can, perhaps in its best way, stretch and widen the human soul, making it large enough to know God, to live for others, and to let in that which is greater than death or life, to let in the fullness of God's love. When James and John asked Jesus to give them the seats of glory at his side, Jesus takes their request seriously and does not, on that occasion, caution them against pride. Rather, he asks them, "Can you drink the cup of suffering that I shall drink?" What Jesus is saying, in effect, is this: you will taste suffering. Everyone will taste suffering. And that suffering will make you deep. But it won't necessarily make you deep in the right way. Suffering can make you deep in compassion and forgiveness, but it can also make you deep in anger or bitterness. As I was considering my own suffering and the suffering of others that I have known, I have seen both outcomes: compassion or bitterness. And I recalled another interpretation of today's gospel where James and John knew exactly what they were asking for: to share in the glory of Christ's passion, one on either side. And here's the most powerful thing to notice in this interpretation. Jesus does not rebuke James or John for their request. He grants it. They will drink his cup with him. But Jesus denies their request to be beside him in his glory. That gift has already been prepared by God for others. Now, which others? For those two thieves crucified on either side of Jesus. God gave the great gift that James and John wanted, not to any of the apostles, but to two unknown, low-down, petty criminals. And what happened? One of those thieves wasted the gift. His suffering was all bitterness and anger. The other one was glorious. In his suffering, he realized that he was not alone. The God of love was literally right by his side. And his response to suffering was the same as what he was open to receive in the midst of his suffering: compassion and forgiveness. We will taste the cup of suffering. Many of us have already suffered deeply. Some of us are suffering right now. Will we grow deep in anger or bitterness, or in compassion and forgiveness? Can we, amid our suffering, know that God hears our cry, our tearful prayers? Know that God will never abandon us, and know that in his great love and compassion, God suffers with us. We are called to be like Jesus, even as suffering servant. Perhaps as the fruit of our suffering, we can serve as part of how God is with someone else in their suffering. We can't ransom them from their pain, but in love and compassion, we can make a sacrifice consistent with Christ's agape love. That self-sacrificing love that puts someone else's well-being ahead of our own. And we can embrace the glory of the passion and the hope that is promised to us all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to offer his life as a ransom for many.